Hello everyone, so it's a pleasure to present to you today some of the key insights from a recent study that we did at OECD NEA, looking at the cost of decarbonization, and by that we mean the system cost related to integrating a large share of renewables and nuclear in low carbon energy mixes. I will need to rely on you. Okay, so this study builds on a large body of work that NEA has done over the last few years, looking firstly at the cost of electricity and the cost of nuclear, in particular with our sister agency, the International Energy Agency, and also looking at this external cost, in particular system cost, and this goes back to 2012, when we were the first to really develop this notion of system cost that now is becoming mainstream in the energy policy debate. I will also add that when it comes to cost, this is also a major area of focus for us at the moment, and we have a study that will come up next year on the reduction of nuclear construction cost. So maybe at the next entretien we should present this result. So, next slides. What are we talking about here? When we talk about the cost of decarbonization, there are several components, and we don't cover everything here, but we focus on the second circle, that is the system cost above plant level. So, at the plant level, you have what you call LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity. It's usually what people talk when they discuss the relative competitiveness of electricity technologies. But it's not all, and it's not all because all these technologies have to be integrated at the level of the electricity system, increasingly at the level of the energy system, because when we decarbonize, we're going to have to integrate more and more energy vectors. And this is at this level that we focus at our study. And maybe above that, for full completeness, we could also include some other external costs that we don't cover here, but we've covered in other reports, talking about environmental externalities, talking about health impacts, and so on. We do cover, however, here, to some extent, the cost of carbon, to the extent that we look at scenarios with decarbonization objectives. Next slide. So when we discuss system cost, here we can further break that down into a number of components. And really this is the heart of system cost today. And this, the first component will be related to what we call profile cost, which can be easily understood by saying that the wind and the sun, the wind doesn't always blow, and at night, well, since there's not much sun. And when that's the case, well, you're gonna need some backup power, and this backup power will not operate as it would otherwise do. And for instance, a dispatchable plant might operate at a lower load factor, and so on. And so all of this creates some cost at the system levels, not at the plant level, but at the system level. The second component is what we call balancing cost, and that's related to the fact that, in particular, variable renewables, that is sun and wind, are more difficult to predict. I mean, there's been a lot of progress in forecasting renewable productions, but still, nevertheless, today, from a statistical perspective, we know that wind and solar will be harder to predict than nuclear or other baseload technology. You can have unplanned outages of nuclear, but from a statistical perspective, this is something that creates short variations and stresses and requires the rest of the system to operate with more flexibility in particular. And then, last but not least, from a spatial perspective, variable renewables will tend to be not located near a location near demand, and that means that at the grid level, you're going to need additional costs for transmission and distribution. This last component, in fact, probably one is when we have the highest high level of uncertainty. It's not easy to really have some good estimates. We didn't model it explicitly, but we rely on the literature to do so. I will also add that obviously all these costs are very much system dependent. It's difficult to come up with very generic assumption of this cost. So one has to be prudent when we take estimates because it's really much depend on which system you operate, to which extent you have flexibility in your system today, in particular hydro resources, to which extent you have interconnection with your neighbors, which is a key today, and so on. So what we will do here is we will model a part of the world which is representative of large European countries with some reasonable hydro, with some good interconnection with its neighbor. But these are not 100% generic assumptions. Next estimates. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So we're going to assess this system cost. We're going to build different scenarios, but we're going to build them under one common constraint, that is to be on a trajectory that is compatible with our commitment under the Paris Agreement. And when we look at what estimates of what this means, decarbonization scenarios for the power system in OECD countries, this means to move by 2050 to below 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Today, at the European level, from the top of my head, in OECD at least, it's about 430 grams. If you could move below 50 grams, that means that you can't have coal anymore. You might still have gas, but very limited, and in fact, it will be essentially used for managing the variability of some renewables. And nuclear. And the key issue we're going to tackle here is to which extent imposing a specific objective on the level of renewables in terms of share in the mix, generation, adds some cost to the system. Next slide. Okay, so here we built 8 scenarios. I won't present all of them in details. The first 4 are scenarios where we indeed impose some share of nuclear in the mix under the common carbon constraints. Then we have additional scenarios. We have scenarios where we have some more, let's say, pushy assumptions on the reduction of the cost of renewables compared to our estimates with IEA. And then we have also sensitivity analysis scenarios where we limit the flexibility we can derive from interconnections from hydro power. And all of this is using some modeling with the MIT that allow us to really have a state-of-the-art model of the power system at the hourly level and so on. This is very important to really model the system cost. In fact, it's not only always done by scenarios, decarbonization scenarios, high renewable scenarios that you might see out there. Right. First, I'd like to highlight some results from a technical perspective. On these graphs, you have on the left 10% scenarios with 10% renewable, on the right 75%. This graph pictures the demand, the annual demand, the load during the curve in red. It's the same on both graphs, the scale is not the same, but the same curve. And in blue, it's what we call the residual demand, that is demand minus the variable renewables. So you can see on the left, they closely match. They are not huge discrepancy. This is how our system operates today, and we know how to deal with that from a system operator perspective. On the right-hand side, this is uncharted territory. We have a huge period of excess demand. That means demand where, even with a lot of new flexibility, with possibility of storage and so on, some of this renewable are going to be curtailed, and as I will see, this has some impact on the system cost. And rapid shift from a large excess capacity to a period where renewables contribute little to security of supply. And even though the modeling will tell us we can operate this system, we're not here clearly tackling all the technical constraints to do with maintaining frequency and so on. So, no, just to highlight that there are huge uncertainty that remains, some upside, if you will, on the feasibility and therefore the cost of moving to such a system. Now, with that in mind, let's look at some of the results. Thank you. The first result, and it closely follows the previous slide, is on indeed the shape of the mix. You have on the left installed capacity, on the right generation for different scenarios with different share of renewables. What you can see is that as we move to a higher share of imposed renewables in mix, clearly we're gonna need to significantly increase the installed capacity. Here it's multiplied by 3, and it will mean for a system which, in a sense, is closely equivalent to France today, to multiply by 3 installed capacity. You can see that we still need a lot of gas, but in fact, gas here move more and more to being used for managing the intermittency of renewables, and you can see that the share of nuclear will symmetrically decrease as the renewable increase. But what about the cost? And that's the next slide. Well, the cost, in particular the system cost, which is what is highlighted on the right, while they increase rapidly with the increase of the share of renewables. And this is because of these 3 components I highlighted before, in particular the profile costs needed to integrate and to support the integration of renewables. And you can see that as we move to 75% of renewables, this system costs amount to nearly euros to 45 euros per megawatt hour, so they become a significant component of the power system. Maybe just a comment here, because you see a lot of model out there, and as I said, from a technical perspective, there's a lot of uncertainties here that might not, and technical constraints that might not be modeled. So clearly, I think with such a picture, we're probably a bit conservative on the system cost for low share of renewables, but clearly our estimates for higher share of renewables are probably quite optimistic compared to what it would really mean in practice to operate such a system. And in particular, just to give you one insight on key modeling parameters that can really change that, it's the weather data you use. If I look at the system operator in France, RTE, when they do scenarios, they're gonna build a 500 time series for data, working with the French Weather Office, and this really change dramatically how much installed capacity, and therefore that has an impact on system cost you need to maintain security of supply. So clearly there's a lot of certainty you can add to this that can really change the picture. Next slide. In addition, one other area that can really have an impact is this carbon constraint. We are under this common carbon constraint of 60 grams, but if you were to move below that, our colleagues from MIT have done some further analysis, and you can see on the left you have the electricity prices, and you can see that as we move below 50 grams of CO2, and the cost increase dramatically if we impose some objective as well for renewables. However, we could easily move to below 50 grams of CO2 if we don't impose and if we keep a high share of nuclear. And you can see, in fact, on the right that moving below 50 grams, there is clearly an increasing role for nuclear in the future. Third results, under these scenarios, it's also interesting to note that while the share of nuclear, and so the installed nuclear capacity will be reduced, but the nuclear that remains will need to be more flexible, in particular here in terms of load following. And I think this is interesting to reflect on the discussion we had in particular yesterday, where we look at other products for nuclear, looking at heat application in Finland. Often desalination and hydrogen are also discussed. And clearly here there is a trade-off that we didn't model, but between doing load following, reducing the load factor of nuclear in effect, and using this, keeping nuclear as base load and producing other valuable products. Valuable products that, for instance, if we look at the heat sector, can help support the decarbonization of these sectors where alternatives are otherwise limited. Now, I'll finish with a couple of results more in terms of the functioning of the power market and what it means for electricity prices. Because we have a huge period of excess capacity, where renewables have to be curtailed, this in effect is represented here with period with zero electricity prices. We don't allow negative prices, but if we would, there will be a high period of negative prices. And conversely, during period where renewables don't generate, we can have prices that really skyrocket to about $100 per megawatt hours here. This means more volatility, more uncertainties, and in fact, in the end, this represents risks that will impact investment decisions and could create risk for capacity adequacy. So there is clearly a question here for policymakers as to how can we, from a market perspective, can we make this work and expect that this will derive signals with enough incentives for the investments we need in the power sector. This also could be represented not looking at the cost, but looking at the market value of renewables. The market values is what different power technologies will expect to get in terms of remuneration if they were only getting it from the wholesale market. And this is what you see on the left-hand side. And what is interesting, and this is the clear parallel with dichotomy with system cost, is that as the level of renewables increases, the market value decreases. And we see that, in fact, today in many power markets. In fact, I think there was a news report recently in Australia where I think there was one solar farm that has to be disconnected every minute because the grid can't operate it. When it's disconnected, it's not generating power for the grid and it's not getting revenues. And so, as we discuss more and more integrating renewables in the mix, in particular at the European level, this issue of market value is probably not fully captures in the policy debate, and to some extent, you see a decreasing cost of renewables, but if market value decreases at a faster rate, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, and you can't really see when we'll be able to massively integrate renewables in the mix. That doesn't mean that we can't integrate any renewables in the mix. This is not my message. In fact, on the right-hand side, you have the scenarios where we have a sharp reduction in the cost of renewables, and you can see that there is some level of market entry, in particular for wind power, but still there will be limit to that because of this issue of declining market value.
Michel.
And this is perfect because this is actually my last slide, so we're right on time, more or less, and have 1 minute. Obviously, there's a lot of important policy recommendations we can derive from this study. I've highlighted some of them. Maybe in the interest of time, I won't go through all of them here. I will focus on the last one. The last one is to say that the issue for policymakers is how can we reduce the system cost to some extent. From an economic perspective, the best way to do that is to allocate this cost fairly to the technology that cause them, because then they have this market signal of system cost, and they can make investment decisions in order to, for instance, in terms of location from implementing wind farm and so on, in order to reduce the system costs that otherwise will not be borne by them, but will be borne by the system. And we do that to some extent today, but I think moving more toward this would clearly support a cost-efficient integration of some renewables together with nuclear. And this is the last message, that to really have a cost-effective decarbonization, we need both. We need all low-carbon technologies in a cost-effective manner. Thank you.
On va peut-être prendre quand même une ou deux questions